But in the end, it's have been very difficult way to make this film, because during the shooting, the interview, it was only the DOP knew which kind of story we make. The permission was to make a movie about the climate change. And because of the safety of Alaa, because of the safety of the crew, and because of the safety of the interview, because we want to make sure we have an interview with Alaa before we go into the next step.
Hello, Halkawt.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So the first question is, hiding Saddam Hussein is a project that took you 14 years. What drove you to dedicate so much time to this particular history?
I am born in the Kurdish city called Halabja, the city which have been bombarded by chemical weapons from Saddam Hussein. And we moved to Norway from the Iraqi Kurdistan because of his power. So I was very curious about the president who ran the country and my backstory. And I didn't believe it when the US forces find Saddam Hussein in the hole in 2003. So I was very curious about the story behind the hole. And it took me 2 years to find Alaa, and it's taken me 10 years to make this film, because I really need to understand the story before I say something.
You mentioned that the Washington Post article helped you identify Alaa. How did you manage to gain his trust, knowing he had just been released from Abu Ghraib prison and initially didn't want to talk?
The name Alaa, name from the Washington Post was very important for me, because before that I was looking for him without the name, but when I find his name, I finally knew who I'm looking for. So I spent 2 years to find him, and by help from the Arabic sheikh from the place where he came from. So the meeting between me and you, the first meeting, he didn't say something. He just confirmed he's the guy who was hiding Saddam Hussein. So I think the answer, I was very patient with him. After I meet him, I was waiting 3 years. And then finally he started to talk. And then he want to tell the truth behind the whole. And this was the huge, long way process from the beginning to the end. And it's why it's taken 10 years, because he was almost destroyed from the Abu Ghraib prison, where I have been in for 7 months, I think, yes.
You are of Kurdish descent and your family fled Iraq under Saddam Hussein's regime. How did you manage this personal dimension while making the film?
You know, I became very emotional, especially during the editing. When we was editing the scene with the city where I'm coming from, with all people have been killed from the chemical weapon. But I really tried to be filmmaker when I made this film. This is why I didn't decide to do the story of the storyteller. My story, I decided to be part of the film. I try to give Alaa the space and the voice to tell in his story without any makeup. And for me, it was very important, because almost everything about the Iraq war have been told from the Western perspective. This is why I really wanted to give him Alaa and telling in his own story from his Arabic perspective.
The relationship between Alaa and Saddam Hussein is fascinating. A simple farmer hosting the most powerful man in Iraq. What did you discover about human nature while exploring this unusual relationship?
I discovered when the dictator with so much power lose his power and ending living in the simple farm, and how it's possible. Especially for me, I born this country, I lived this country, and I lived with the dictator, and I saw how he's run the country. I was really surprised how it's end. And this is why for me it was very important to just telling the story about the story behind the whole, because we have seen Saddam Hussein, how he lived as a president. But we never see how he lived for the last 285 days when he was escaped from the US forces.
The filming had to be done in utmost secrecy, particularly due to the threat from the Islamic State. How did you manage to protect your team and sources during production?
Hopefully I was working as a journalist, so I knew how I am working with the material, with the crew, with the safety. But in the end, it's have been very difficult way to make this film. Because during the shooting, the interview, it was only the DOP knew which kind of story we make. The permission was to make a movie about the climate change. And because of the safety of Alaa, because of the safety of the crew, and because of the safety of the interview, because we want to make sure we have an interview with Alaa before we go into the next step.
You previously directed El Clásico and Red Heart, films that also talk about Iraq, but from a more fictional angle. What did the documentary format bring differently to your way of telling this story?
I feel documentary is more difficult. You have to work with the facts, and every information you find out, you have to find other sources to get a confirm, and it takes time, and this is why I spent in 10 years, because when we find Alaa and then get the confirmation from the other forces, this is a real Alaa, his passport, and the all information from the US side. We made almost the calendar for each day what happened during 235 days. It's really difficult to make a documentary.
There's a clear intention in the film to show a rarely exposed perspective, that of the Iraqis themselves. The very positive review the film is receiving suggests this change and perspective was needed. What do you think about this?
For me, it was very important to tell in the story from the real original perspective, because the first time I met Alaa, the meeting was for 4 days and we was fighting 3 days, because for me the Saddam Hussein was the dictator who was killing the people by chemical weapon, and for him the Saddam Hussein was a president still. And I was very surprised, but in the end my story was the story behind the whole, and how he did succeed to hiding Saddam Hussein for so long. And I think the key was to, telling the part of the story without going to any other, how the dictator lived during the presidency.
As a director who has lived between Norway and Iraq, how do you view Iraq's evolution since Saddam Hussein's capture?
I feel like I have a Kurdish heart with the Norwegian mind. So for me, what happened after 2003, this is the part of my personal story. But here I really try to be telling the story about the story behind the whole and try to be filmmaker. After
this film, what kind of stories do you want to tell now?
My next project is about the female Kurdish sniper based on true story. I hope it's coming out in 2026.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.